Imagine the night slowly descending over the Egyptian desert, where the wind carries the scent of cool and silent sand. The sky turns deep purple, then pitch black, as if swallowing every sound in the world. In the distance, a valley that once served as the resting place of nobles and kings now lies drowned in an endless silence. There are no footsteps, no torches, only the soft whisper of wind brushing against ancient stones, sweeping away the remnants of a history nearly forgotten. Here, in a place seldom mentioned in books or travel tales, stretches what modern people call the Valley of Silence, a wide plain filled with nameless tombs, not as magnificent as the Valley of the Kings, nor as grand as the pyramids of Giza. Yet here, behind its obscurity, rests a secret older than its name. As you close your eyes, imagine the air so still, with no city noise, no vehicles, only the quiet rhythm of your heartbeat blending with whispers of the past. The night in this valley is unlike any other. Its sound is deeper, like an echo from thousands of years ago, like the breath of a world long gone. The sandstone paths beneath your feet remember the footsteps of those who are no more. The builders, the diggers, the worshippers, they have all turned to dust. But their traces remain, carved into walls, etched in eroded hieroglyphs, marked in tools abandoned beneath the earth. No moonlight reaches the valley floor, only the faint reflection of stars trapped in the dry air. Here, time has ceased to move. Birds do not fly above it, and no camel dares to cross the winding rocky road that leads inward. Villagers nearby say that when great sandstorms pass, the earth in the valley shifts as if something stirs below. They speak softly, for the name of this place is rarely spoken aloud. No one wishes to draw its attention. Now, take a slow breath and imagine sitting at the edge of that valley. The warm wind brushes your skin, carrying fine grains of sand. Before you stretch as an endless desert, and beyond it, the modern world feels distant, almost unreal. Time loses meaning here. 1 hour can feel like 1,000 years, and within that stillness, you might hear something unexplainable. Like a low hum from the earth, like the whisper of someone telling an ancient story from within the grave. No one knows who was first buried here. There are no royal inscriptions, no divine symbols, only hollowed stone chambers, half open, as if waiting for someone to return. Archaeologists say this valley may once have been part of a secret royal necropolis, a place where those erased from history were buried without names. But that remains only a theory. Because each time an excavation begins, something always happens. Tools break, notes disappear, and sometimes the night at their camp feels unbearably long. This is our first stop tonight, not to seek answers, but to listen, to quiet the heart and let imagination wander over the ancient sand. Within every grain lies a story never fully told. And perhaps within this flowing silence, you might hear it more clearly. Not every mystery must be solved, for some were created simply to accompany humankind as they remember and slowly forget. The night deepens, and the temperature in the desert slowly drops. From afar, the sand glimmers faintly like shards of glass beneath the starlight. There are no torches, no signs of human life. only the wind moves gently, touching every stone surface and creating a sound almost like a quiet breath. In that stillness, you may begin to feel something difficult to describe. There is a kind of awareness rising from the ground, like an ancient memory not yet extinguished. The Valley of Silence holds not only tombs, but forgotten stories. And when the night reaches its deepest hour, it feels as though the world itself is waiting for someone to listen once more to the tales buried beneath the layers of sand. Some researchers believe this place is the remnant of a secret burial complex built for those erased from royal records. They were not powerful enough to be remembered, yet too significant to be discarded. Their bodies were laid to rest here, without names, without statues, without offerings, only cold stone chambers and strange symbols carved into walls that no one has yet deciphered. The inscriptions appear like broken prayers, as if someone tried to speak but lost their voice mid-sentence. And that is where the strangeness begins. For even in silence, this valley still speaks, in a language only understood by those who dare to listen. Around the valley, there are rocky hills shaped like human faces. Some appear to smile, others seem to weep. When the afternoon sun fades and shadows stretch long, those shapes change, and the faces slowly disappear, as if alive between light and darkness. Villagers believe those hills were once guardians of the valley, spirits that kept the souls below from wandering away. And those who approach without permission lose their sense of direction, walking in endless circles until night swallows all vision. You might think these are only legends, yet even archaeologists with modern equipment report strange experiences. Compasses that fail to point north, watches that stop at the same time each day, and footsteps in the night that cannot be explained. Some even claim to hear soft music, like a stone flute being played, though no one is there. The sound rises from beneath the earth, carried by a dry wind that smells of ancient dust and soil untouched for centuries. Some call it hallucination, born of exhaustion, while others believe it is a whisper from the past. Now, as you continue to imagine this place, let your body settle, your breathing slow, and your thoughts drift with the desert air. Picture yourself walking down the slope of the valley, your feet pressing into fragile, cracked earth. With every step, you hear the faint shifting of stones, like a whisper following behind. You don't know whether it's your own echo or something else, yet you are not afraid. For here, fear and calm blend into one. There is no danger, only a vast mystery, like an ocean without a shore. The night wind blows once more, carrying fine grains that dance in the air. Beneath the starlight, they shimmer like glowing ash, rising and falling with invisible rhythm. Amid their motion, you begin to feel a strange peace, as if you have arrived where you were meant to be. There is no sound, no disturbance, only you and the valley speaking without words. Every grain of sand seems to hold a story, and every breath feels part of the earth's ancient rhythm. In this place, time stands still, not because it is lost, but because it has chosen to rest so that humankind may listen to silence with their entire soul. Around 1300 years before Christ, in the region now known as the Western Desert of Egypt, there was an area the ancients called Ta Set Amenti, the land of those who have crossed the boundary of life. It was here that the Valley of Silence was believed to exist, hidden behind red cliffs that reflected the afternoon sun like embers that never died. Modern explorers have only found faint traces of its existence, fragments of papyrus, hieroglyphs on tomb walls, and oral tales from Bedouin tribes who wander across the sands. According to them, the valley was not merely a burial ground, but a gate between the world of the living and the world of spirits. A threshold where time stopped and the human voice no longer echoed. Some archaeologists claim it was once part of the royal necropolis of Thebes, while others strongly disagree. They argue that the valley does not appear on any ancient maps, as if deliberately erased from history. The only concrete clue is a fragment of stone carved with the image of a closed eye and two hands folded upon a chesta symbol, rarely found in any Egyptian tomb. That image is believed to represent eternal silence, a wordless prayer for souls trapped between two realms. Here lies the heart of the mystery, for whenever someone attempts to trace its path, a sandstorm rises suddenly, covering trails and wiping away every sign of direction. Imagine the scene thousands of years ago. Excavation workers marching in rows, carrying flickering torches, their footsteps echoing softly among the stones. In the distance, ritual chants hum a heavy, monotonous tone, like a mantra repeated endlessly. High on a hill, priests stand still, holding staffs carved with the symbol of the serpent, guardians of the border between life and death. They believed that every soul buried in the valley did not truly leave, but waited to return through the wind. That is why, even today, every gust of wind in that region is said to carry the breath of the ancient dead. In ancient writings found near Luxor, there is a single line that defies translation. It reads something like, "They sleep in silence, yet their eyes see beneath the sand." No one knows its exact meaning, but many link it to the Valley of Silence. Perhaps it was a warning, or perhaps just an ancient poem about death. But to scholars of Egyptian spirituality, the line suggests the persistence of consciousness beyond death, that a soul may remain, watching the world through layers of time and dust. In that valley, the boundary between the living and the dead is not as clear as we imagine. Now, only a few dare to seek the valley. Those who do often return pale, claiming to hear songs that no human could have sung. One researcher from Cairo wrote in his journal that he felt constantly watched, even when no one was near. He wrote, "The wind there feels like an open eye, and every whisper sounds like a name called from within the earth." Shortly after, he vanished on his second expedition to the site. His tools were later found buried in sand. His watch stopped precisely at 2:14 in the morning. Since then, no official mission has been sent. The Valley of Silence remains asleep beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it. If the Valley of Silence ever truly existed, legend describes it as a place where stones could speak through stillness. The cliffs rose like a sea of copper rock, shimmering under the setting sun. Between those cliffs were said to lie tunnels carved by human hands, so deep that no one could tell where they ended. Ancient depictions describe an entrance unlike any other, not a grand doorway like those of royal tombs or pyramids, but a narrow fissure resembling a wound in the earth just wide enough for one person to slip through. There were no carvings of kings, no names of gods, only a smooth stone surface, marked with faint traces of soot, as if someone long ago left a warning in silence. Those who dared to enter described a strange sensation. Upon crossing the threshold, the air grew thick and warm, as if the place itself exhaled slowly. At first glance, the tunnels appeared natural, but on closer inspection, every wall bore symmetrical patterns impossible for nature alone. Thin, flame-like lines glowed faintly when touched by torchlight. Some experts believe they were not mere decorations, but ritual symbols meant to seal or contain something sacred or, perhaps, dangerous. In ancient Egyptian belief, fire was both purification and destruction. Its presence in tombs often symbolized a spiritual passage, a test in which body and soul had to endure eternal flame to be truly free. Yet, the valley's mystery was not limited to its structure. Among Egyptian priestly traditions, there are tales of a group called those without names. Their duty was not to guard treasures or royal bodies, but to protect silence itself. They were said to live underground for decades, memorizing wordless prayers and communicating only through gestures. Whenever someone was buried, they would emerge with small copper lamps, guiding the spirit to its resting place. No archaeological record confirms their existence, but many spiritual historians believe such a group could have existed, as ancient funerary texts mention servants who were unseen by eyes, yet who hear every breath that ends. Imagine the atmosphere within such a valley. No birds, no wind only, the heartbeat echoing faintly within one's chest. The torchlight ripples against the stone, moving slowly like liquid fire. Occasionally, a grain of sand falls, a tiny sound in the vast silence. In certain corners, the air smells scorched, as though a fire still lingers somewhere unseen. Could it be the remnant of an ancient ritual, or a sign that the valley still lives? No one knows. Scientists who attempted to measure the temperature and gases within the caves found their results inconsistent, changing mysteriously each time they returned. It was as though the valley possessed its own will, shifting with each intruder's breath. A darker legend tells of a chamber deep within the chamber of the last breath. It is said that there the kings who failed to reach immortality were burned without name, their ashes released into the desert wind. The fire, in this case, was not punishment, but liberation from sin, from identity, from memory. Yet, for many, the idea of burning a sacred body defied the Egyptian devotion to preservation. Thus, some historians believe the valley belonged not to Egypt proper, but to a heretical sect, one that worshipped silence and fire as two faces of the same God. At the deepest heart of the Valley of Silence lies a tale whispered only among the oldest priests and in fragments of papyrus never fully translated. It speaks of the keepers of Pharaoh, small group of beings said to be no longer entirely human. They were believed to have been born beneath a broken moon, when the desert sands swirled in spirals and the sky seemed to tremble between two worlds. Their duty was not to guard treasure, nor the bodies of kings, but to ensure that the ancient flame within the valley would never die. For, according to ancient belief, if that flame were ever extinguished, the souls sleeping within the stone would awaken and seek their way back into the world of the living. Their ritual was performed only once every 1,000 years. On the night when the Nile reached its lowest ebb and the star Sirius rose above the horizon. That night was known as the Night of the Fire's Breath. The remaining records describe 7 guardians walking toward the heart of the valley, each carrying a torch lit from 7 sacred sites along the Nile. They walked in silence, without music, only the echo of their footsteps and the whisper of the desert wind striking the cliffs. When they reached the valley's center, they stood before a great black stone called the Stone of the Last Breath. It was believed to be the meeting point of the living, and the dead end beneath it lay a chamber known as the Womb of Night, where the eternal flame had burned since the beginning of the world. During the ritual, they would lower their heads and place their torches upon the black stone. The flames from the 7 torches would merge into one, emitting a light beyond any color known to humankind. It illuminated not just the chamber, but the bodies of the guardians themselves, making their veins and bones appear translucent, glowing from within. Once the fire was whole, the guardians would sit in a circle and close their eyes. No prayers were spoken, no chant, soon only the long silence that could last for days. They believed that during this silence, their souls would leave their bodies and walk with the flame, descending into the deeper layers of the earth that no living being could reach. Yet, when the ritual ended, one of the 7 never returned. No one knew what became of them. Some legends said they chose to remain within the flame, becoming part of the light that guarded the valley. Others claimed they were consumed by their own sins and thus could not return to their earthly form. In a stone inscription found near Swan, it was written that when a keeper vanished, their face would appear days later on the walls of the valley, formed from soot and dust, staring toward the world with hollow eyes that glowed faintly at night. No one dared touch it, for it was said that those who stared too long would dream of burning and awaken with skin cold as stone. Modern archaeologists who discovered fragments of this legend tried to locate the physical site, but none succeeded. Some theorized that the valley had been swallowed by the desert, buried beneath millennia of Nile floods. Others suggested it was a spiritual metaphor, symbol of humanity's descent into silence and surrender to the unknown. Yet a few occult scholars insisted it was literal. They believed the ancient fire was not ordinary flame, but cosmic energy, the remnant of the force that first breathed life into the universe. And if the valley truly existed, then perhaps that fire still burns, hidden beneath the desert, waiting for the next ritual to awaken it once more. Imagine that night, the ritual in stillness. The desert holds its breath, the moon reflects a cold light on the cliffs, and 7 figures draped in gray walk slowly, carrying faint torches. They move like shadows among stones older than memory. When they reach the stone of the last breath, they ignite their flames one by one, and the air itself shifts. It sounds like the earth exhaling. The fire grows without fuel, forming tongues of light that move like living things. In that moment, time ceases. There is no day, no night, only the pulse of light, as if the universe breathes once again. Imagine the morning in that valley, when the sun has not yet pierced the thin mist hanging above the desert. The air is cold and dusty, and every step makes a faint sound on the damp sand. In the distance, the silhouettes of ancient diggers move silently, as if time itself runs slower there. They are not ordinary laborers, but chosen ones, men and women who can endure silence. Most never leave the valley once they arrive. Some were born among the ruins, lived, and were buried there, as if the valley itself were a womb that never lets go of its children. Around them lie simple tools of stone and bronze, small hammers, worn chisels, and faded clay jars that once held water. At the valley's edge stand tents, of course, pale brown fabric, shelters after long days under the burning sun. Inside, there is no chatter, only the soft murmur of wind slipping through seams, swaying the tiny oil lamp hanging from a wooden pole. Each night, some sit facing the valley, gazing toward the dark ridge of black stone believed to be the gate to the underworld. None dare approach after sunset. Some claim to hear footsteps underground or whispers rising from the cliffs, yet no one investigates. They only bow, light incense from acacia resin, and let it burn slowly as they watch the dim stars flicker in the desert sky. Every morning before work, they perform a small ritual. Each takes a handful of sand from the valley floor, throws it into the air, and murmurs words no one understands. These words, passed down for generations, are said to calm the spirits. No record remains of their meaning, but all believe that without the ritual, the valley would reject them. There is one tale of a young digger who forgot to do it and vanished among the rocks that day. No pit, no collapse, just his tools left behind, covered in soft dust. Since then, no one has ever skipped the ritual, not even those who claimed disbelief. Time stands still here. There are no seasons, no real changes in weather. Those skies shifting from pale blue to amber, then to black. Birds rarely fly above, and animals avoid it. A caravan's camel once refused to cross the stone threshold, screaming and retreating until it fell. The people took it as a sign that the valley did not wish to be disturbed. Still, the diggers stayed, bound by something they could not explain. Some said they were cursed to guard a secret. Others believed the valley was the only place that truly understood them. Here, they ate, slept, worked, and slowly forgot the world beyond. Sometimes at midnight, a faint light moved among the stones, like a torch, but pulsing softly as if from within the earth. When someone approached, it faded, leaving behind a metallic scent and the faint taste of burnt dust. The elders said it was no illusion, but a sign the old soul still walking among them. Not evil, only restless. Searching for what they had lost, perhaps their names, perhaps their memories. For in this valley, no grave bears a name. Stones mark the bodies only with faint symbols, curved lines, dots, shapes beyond translation. Some modern archaeologists believe these symbols were not writing, but visual echoes of sound vibrations turned into form. Among these nameless stones, one stands apart. Larger, smoother, and cold even under the sun. They call it the Stone of Long Sleep. None know who lies beneath it, but those who sit too near claim to hear breathing from below. Slow and deep, like someone dreaming. Whether real or mere echo trapped by the wind, no one can tell. In a place like this, the line between reality and myth fades. Perhaps the valley does not only hold the dead, but unfinished dreams. Perhaps every grain of sand is a fragment of thought once terrified of being forgotten. In the silent valley, there exists a tale never spoken aloud, yet always present in every whisper of the night. The guardians of the valley call it the tale of the nameless king. There are no official records of him, no inscriptions, no papyrus scrolls detailing his reign. Yet through generations of spoken memory, it is said that he was a ruler deliberately erased from history. He was not a king by birth, but by conquest, seizing power through blood and betrayal. His rise to the throne came after a night of slaughter within the palace walls. He silenced the priests, burned the chronicles of the past, and ordered the names of his enemies chiseled out of stone. When it was done, he commanded his people to build a new burial valley far from the river's reach, far from the eyes of the world. There, his body would one day be hidden and his memory erased. But strange things began the moment construction started. Workers reported voices from beneath the ground, as though someone spoke from inside the rock. Some fell ill, feverish, and died without cause. Their bodies were buried at the valley's edge, large stones piled above them to ensure they never rose again. Work halted for a time, but the king was impatient. He demanded the project continue, claiming the voices were a divine trial, a sign he had been chosen to transcend death. From that day on, every stone was laid with blood, and the valley filled with the scent of iron and burning resin. The nameless king did not only erase the past, he denied the future. He forbade the writing of his name, forbade any worship after death. In a secret record found centuries later near Thebes, one strange line appeared: "He who wishes to sleep unremembered shall awaken in flame." No one knows its true meaning, but some archaeologists link it to the legend of the burned mummies found in ancient tombs. These mummies were imperfectly embalmed, their skin blackened as if burned from within. Some were discovered twisted bodies, contorted as if escaping something. There was no trace of fire, no heat residue, only charred flesh in silence. Among all the theories, one persisted. They were his followers, buried alive beside their king, their souls refusing rest. Nights in the valley grew stranger after that tale spread. Guardians in their tents reported the air changing. On certain nights, the sand itself seemed to breathe, rising and falling in slow rhythm, like the chest of a sleeping giant. Pressing an ear to the ground, they heard faint humming, not in any known language, both soothing and terrifying. Some believed it was the song of loyal followers beneath the earth, still guarding their master, who never truly died. Others said it was merely the desert wind, trapped between stone layers. But those who heard it swore it was alive, not wind, not animal, but the echo of a past that refused to rest. At the center of the valley stands one structure unlike any other: square chamber with walls darker than the surrounding rock. No symbols, no carvings, only smooth black stone that reflects moonlight like glass. Modern archaeologists call it the Chamber of Silence, believed to be the valley's core. When discovered in 1897 by a French expedition, they noted that the air inside was unnaturally cold. Pocket watches stopped working, and some reported shadows moving across the walls, though no light flickered but their lanterns. These reports were buried by the colonial authorities, dismissed as superstition. Yet the expedition leader's private notes, found decades later in Paris, held one chilling line: "We did not find a tomb. We found a breath." That phrase remains a mystery. What is the breath? There is no definitive answer. Some theorize vast underground passages channel ancient Nile air currents. Others believe it was a spiritual energy chamber crafted by priests to balance the living and the dead. But for the locals living near the valley, the breath is no metaphor. They believe the valley is still alive, and the nameless king still waits sleeping beneath the black stone, waiting for someone to speak his name again so he may rise from his endless sleep. In 1902, 5 years after the first discovery in the Valley of Silence, a new expedition was sent to reopen the entrance of the Black Stone Chamber, now known as the Chamber of Silence. The team was led by a young archaeologist named Etienne Moreau, a man known more as a dreamer than a scientist. His journals, found decades later in an old chest, revealed that he came not only to excavate, but to prove something deeply personal. He wrote of recurring visions of a place he had never seen before, a valley shimmering with golden sand, and a faint voice calling to him from beneath the earth. In the dream, he always stood before the black door. Hearing a slow exhalation from the cracks of the stone, like the breath of something ancient asleep in time. When he and his team arrived, they found the main entrance buried again under a collapse of sand. It took 3 weeks to clear, during which several workers reported hearing faint knocks from behind the rock, as if someone was trying to signal them. Moreau wrote that he felt no fear, only calm, as if the valley was welcoming him home. The night before opening the door, he sat alone with a lantern in front of the black structure and claimed to hear a soft voice calling his name, not spoken by a human tongue, but carried by a long breath of wind. The next morning, he appeared pale, yet filled with strange energy. He told his assistant, "If this place holds breath, I will be the first to hear it." When the door was finally opened, cold air rushed out like a sigh from an empty space. Several lanterns extinguished themselves, and the remaining light flickered across the glossy black walls. There were no hieroglyphs, no paintings, only silence and stone that felt almost alive to the touch. They descended a narrow corridor, and after 50 meters entered a vast hall with uncarved round pillars. At its center rested a massive stone chest, strangely unsealed. From the gap between lid and base, a moist air drifted out, smelling of metal and wilted flowers. There was no mummy, no funerary artifacts, only emptiness and air that seemed to pulse faintly. One team member noted that as they stood near the chest, a slow thumping sound emanated from within, like the distant beat of a heart. Moreau approached and laid his hand upon the stone, then drew a deep breath. He whispered, "This is not a tomb. It is a body." After those words, something changed in the room. Their lanterns flickered wildly, and a long exhalation echoed from every corner. Some screamed, yet their voices seemed swallowed by the air. Moreau ordered the others to leave, but did not move himself. He stood staring at the chest, his eyes hollow, as if listening to something only he could hear. When his team finally dragged him out, he was silent, and for days afterward, he spoke no words. Weeks later, the expedition was abruptly halted by French authorities in Cairo. No official report was ever released, and the valley was once again closed to the public. Yet the story did not end there. In the following years, rumors spread that Etienne Moreau never returned to France. He vanished one night in a nearby village, leaving behind his tent and scattered papers. In one of the final pages of his journal, he wrote a single haunting line: "I have found its breath, and now it breathes through me." That line would puzzle scholars for decades. Some saw it as a metaphor for human obsession with immortality, while others believed Moreau never truly left the valley. Perhaps he simply traded his breath for another, something no longer human. To this day, the chamber has never been reopened. Every modern attempt to excavate it again has been thwarted by unexplained events. Machines fail, cameras crack, and temperature sensors fluctuate without cause. Scientists call it natural electromagnetic interference, but the locals say the valley is guarding its secret. They whisper that as long as the nameless king's name remains unspoken, the valley will stay asleep. But if one day someone dares to call it again, the valley will breathe once more. Years after Etienne Moreau's disappearance, the small village west of the Valley of Silence began to change in ways no one could explain. Locals said the night air had grown heavier, as though filled with something unseen. The wind, once soft, now carried faint whispers from the direction of the valley. And animals, especially camels and dogs, refused to approach after sunset. No one knew when it began, but tales of long, drawn-out breathing sounds spreading across the desert became common among traveling merchants. Some even claimed to see a dim bluish light pulsating over the sands like a heartbeat before fading away. The elders warned never to stare at it too long, believing it to be the breath of a spirit searching for a new vessel. Each year, there was one night when the silence grew so absolute that not even the shifting of sand could be heard. They called it the night that holds its breath. On that night, villagers would close their doors, extinguish their fires, and sit motionless in total darkness. They believed that if anyone spoke or made the slightest sound, the valley would hear and come for them. A German missionary's 1911 journal recorded that during one such night, a cow was found dead without a wound, its body seemingly drained from within. Near it lay a small circle of sand that slowly swirled despite the still air. He wrote simply, "Here, silence is not the absence of sound, but something alive, waiting to be heard." Time moved on, and the world outside Egypt transformed. Cities rose, empires fell, but the valley remained the same, unmoving and forgotten. Still, not by all. Explorers reported strange interference with their compasses and watches. Needles would slowly turn toward the valley, then stop. Clocks ceased ticking for minutes before resuming. One of the most famous accounts came from a British pilot, Arthur Wells, who flew over the western desert in 1932. He reported that his instruments went dead for 3 full minutes as he passed above a haze of sand. Looking down, he saw what appeared to be a great circle of earth, gently rising and falling as if breathing. He never filed an official report, But years later, in a private letter, he wrote, "I think something down there looked back at the sky. Villagers said all of it was the result of the breath released from the stone chamber in 1902. They called it the breath of the nameless king, an awareness drifting through the air, seeking a body to inhabit again. The old priests from a nearby temple once attempted a calming ritual, burning resin and chanting forgotten prayers, but the ritual ended abruptly when several collapsed and never woke again. Since then, no one dared to repeat it. They chose instead to stay still and hope the breath would sleep once more. Yet sometimes, under the full moon, people could still feel it, a faint rhythm pulsing beneath their feet, like a distant heartbeat buried under sand. When that happened, every sound stopped, as if the world itself held its breath in answer. No scientist could offer a full explanation. Some called it an underground acoustic illusion, an echo born of hollow chambers beneath the earth. But those who lived there knew better. They felt something alive, breathing with them in the ground, in the air, and perhaps even within themselves. The valley was not dead. It merely slept with open eyes, watching all who dared to come near. In its silence lay a deceptive chimese, though something ancient, sacred and forgotten, was waiting for a name to be spoken once again. And whenever the wind passed softly over the desert, the valley's whisper returned, long and deep, reminding the living that not everything buried is truly gone. In 1974, beneath a sky burning white and a desert that shimmered at 40 degrees, a young archaeologist named Dr. Samir Al-Nahas arrived at the long-forgotten village. He came not by chance, but because of an old document uncovered in the archives of Cairo University, faded copy of Etienne Moreau's lost journal, missing for more than 70 years. Within its fragile pages lay a rough sketch of what he called the breathing chamber. Samir was a man of science, shaped by evidence and reason, yet something in Moreau's words refused to let him sleep. The explorer's writing sounded less like field notes and more like a prayer, the desperate confession of someone who had seen something that logic could not contain. Samir decided he must go. If such a place existed beneath the sands, he would be the one to find it. The journey was harsh. The desert blurred all sense of direction, turning distance into repetition, every step mirroring the last. Samir traveled with two locals, an old man named Hassan and his nephew, Youssef. They navigated by sun and stars, carrying water in leather flasks, pausing only when strange winds whispered from unseen places. Hassan rarely spoke, but each time they stopped, he drove his wooden staff into the sand as though marking invisible boundaries. When Samir asked why, Hassan murmured that in this valley, footsteps must be remembered, for the sand devours memory. Samir said nothing, though he noticed the wind never shifted it, always blew inward, drawing them toward a silent center. On the third day, they reached a barren plain stripped of all vegetation. At its heart lay a large rectangular stone, half buried beneath sand. Samir recognized it instantly from Moreau's sketch. He knelt, touching its surface, and felt a chill unnatural against the desert's heat. Pressing his ear to it, he heard something faint, a soft, rhythmic exhalation rising from below. Youssef stepped back in fear, while Hassan fell to his knees, reciting an ancient Arabic prayer, long forgotten by most. Samir did not interrupt. He simply listened, uncertain whether the sound was real or the echo of his own breath. It continued long, steady, alive as if the earth itself was inhaling. He chose to dig. All afternoon they worked, and by the time the moon rose, the lower edge of the stone had been freed. Beneath it yawned a narrow passage descending into darkness. The air that drifted out was cool and damp, impossibly out of place. Samir aimed his flashlight inside. The walls were smooth, carved by human hands, spiraling downward like the pattern of lungs. On one wall, a vast spiral engraving coiled toward the unseen depths. Hassan urged them to stop for the night, warning that the valley's breath grew strongest when the moon gazed directly upon it. Samir hesitated, then agreed. They camped near the stone, though none of them truly slept. Between the sighing winds and shifting sand, there were whispers rising from the whole words in no known tongue, yet carrying a rhythm that felt eerily familiar, like a prayer spoken backward. Before dawn, Samir wrote in his journal that the night had felt longer than time itself. He confessed that in the dark, he sensed a warm breath upon his neck, though no one stood behind him. He tried convincing himself it was the wind, but deep down he knew the truth: the wind does not breathe like that. His final note for the morning read, "The silence of this valley has a heartbeat." When Hassan saw the line, his face turned pale. He told Samir that some in the village believed the valley was not a place for the dead, but for something that slept between life and death. Samir said nothing. He only stared toward the valley, his eyes no longer those of a man seeking discovery, but of one who had begun to realize that whatever waited below had always known he would come. That morning, the air felt different. The sun had not yet risen, yet the valley glowed with a dim, gray, light like fog, not made of moisture, but of time held still. Dr. Samir stood at the edge of the hole, gazing into the darkness below that seemed bottomless. He turned on his lantern and slowly lowered it by a rope. The beam caught the smooth stone walls, revealing delicate carvings, turtle-length circles, forming patterns that resembled breathing pathways. There were no hieroglyphs, no gods, no royal names. Only rhythm, only pattern, as though created not to be seen, but to be heard. Hassan stood back, rigid, while Yusef's hands trembled. Samir told them quietly that he would go down. Hassan tried to stop him, but the words died in his throat. He knew once a man hears the breath of the earth, he cannot rest until he finds its lungs. The stairway spiraled downward, narrow as a throat. Each step echoed, but the echoes did not return evenly. They paused, as if something below listened before answering. The walls were damp, strange for a desert cave. The deeper Samir went, the colder it became, not the biting cold of night, but a calm chill that swallowed all sound. He paused often, writing short notes in the small journal strapped to his chest. He described the scent, not dust or decay, but the faint sweetness of burned incense, long extinguished. From the cracks between stones came whispers, soft and rhythmic, like a sleeping breath. When he aimed his light downward, it vanished into thick darkness that refused to reflect. Far below, the stairs opened into a long horizontal passage. Spirals covered the walls, larger now, darkened with what looked like soot. At its center was a small vent in the floor too narrow for a man to crawl through, yet wide enough to exhale. The air that emerged was cool and moist, and the sound of it was indistinguishable from a human breath. Samir leaned close, listening. The exhale seemed to come from a great distance, as if something slept behind the stone. He wrote in his journal, almost prayerfully, "This earth is not dead. It merely rests." At the end of the passage stood a sealed stone door with no handle, only a thin vertical gap at its center. Around it spiraled a three-layered symbol, unlike any known Egyptian sign. He brushed away the dust, revealing carvings so fine they resembled skin without veins. Under the trembling light, the door appeared to pulse slow, deliberate, alive. When he placed his palm against it, he felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat buried in stone. Yusef called from above, asking if he was all right. The voice echoed down the passage, stretching, fading, and when it returned, it was only a soft exhalation in the valley, answering in its own breath. Samir did not reply, simply stared at the door, expressionless. He knew that if he opened it, there might be no way back. Yet something within the silence invited him, not with sound, but with awareness. He felt he had known this place long before his birth. In his final note of that morning, he wrote, "Perhaps this is not the valley of the dead. Perhaps it is the lung of the earth holding the last breath of the first man." When he closed his journal, the light in his hand flickered. For an instant, the entire corridor seemed to pulse in rhythm with his breathing. Stone, air, and body became one. Hassan shouted again from above, his voice now full of fear. But Samir said nothing. He simply waited before the door, sensing that something either from within or from himself was about to open. The stone door did not open with thunder or tremor. It moved silently, like someone pulling a blanket from a sleeping body. Cold air slipped through the gap, carrying a scent that could not be described, not decay, not perfume, but a blend of wet stone and incense burned thousands of years ago. Samir stood motionless, letting that breath of ancient air touch his skin. His lantern dimmed, but still enough to reveal the chamber beyond. Inside, the walls were no longer sandstone, but something smoother, faintly translucent, as though glass formed by unimaginable heat. The spirals continued inward, drawing the gaze to the center of the room, where a large, coffin-like object rested. Yet, it was not stone. Its surface was deep black, reflecting light in an unnatural way, as if the glow passed into it rather than bouncing off. Samir stepped closer. Each footfall made a soft echo, like a held breath. The air grew heavier, denser, as if the room itself were filled with liquid time. He paused a few meters away from the object, noticing the floor beneath him. Circular patterns surrounded the coffin, etched with tiny points of faint light, like fireflies suspended in stone. Crouching down, he aimed his beam at one of them and realized they were not jewels or gems, but small black metallic spheres vibrating faintly, almost breathing. Above, the outside world seemed gone. Hassan and Yusef's distant voices vanished into silence. Only the room remained, alive and still. Samir looked again at the black sarcophagus. It was slightly curved, not carved in the style of gods or pharaohs, but smooth, organic, almost fluid. No inscriptions, no names, no stories. Only lines flowing like rivers over its surface before disappearing into shadow. He felt a strange urge to touch it. When his fingers brushed the surface, it was warm, not stone warm, but living warm, like the skin of something asleep. For an instant, he heard a sound from within. Not whisper, not moan. A breath. Deep, steady, endless. He stepped back, scanning the chamber for another source, but there was none. The spirals on the walls seemed to tremble slightly, moving with the same rhythm. Then, a memory surfaced, something he had once read in a lost Egyptian text. A myth of a valley known as the valley that holds the first breath. Scholars had dismissed it, but standing here, surrounded by still air that moved like lungs, he wondered if myth and truth had simply traded places. He opened his journal and wrote, "Perhaps this is not a tomb. Perhaps it is a chamber meant to keep something alive." He sat cross-legged on the floor, facing the black sarcophagus. He counted his breaths and felt that the room inhaled and exhaled with him. Air flowed gently through unseen vents, brushing his face like a pulse. Slowly, he closed his eyes. In that darkness, he sensed a presence not divine, not human, but ancient, older than Egypt itself. It did not speak, but he knew something was watching him through the thin veil of time. In that silence, the sound became clearer, though not through his ears. It came from within, from inside his bones and blood, a rhythm soft and distant, like the echo of an unfinished dream. Samir opened his eyes, and the chamber had changed. The metallic spheres on the floor now pulsed with light, glowing and dimming in rhythm with his breathing. His heartbeat no longer felt separate from the space. Each throb seemed to bounce off the walls and return, again and again, in an endless echo. He rose slowly, approaching the black coffin once more. The voice within his head grew steady. He could not understand the words, but they carried the weight of language and ancient prayer, whispered by something that had never forgotten how to speak. He tried to record the sensation in his journal, but his hands trembled. The ink on the page began to twist and shift, forming patterns he did not write. He stared as the lines of text bent into the same spiral motif carved into the walls. Taking a deep breath, he tried to speak. "Who are you?" he whispered, though the sound never reached the air. Instead, it returned as thought, as if something had answered without shape or tongue. The air began to hum softly. Dust motes floated in slow circles. And from within the sarcophagus came a faint vibration like distant insects growing into a low, soothing resonance. Samir watched in awe as the coffin shifted slightly, opening just enough to release a thin line of silver light. The glow was soft, not blinding, like vapor illuminated from within water. His skin tingled, but not with fear. There was calmness in that light, a deep serenity. He leaned forward to look inside, but the closer he stared, the heavier his eyelids felt, as though drawn by some gentle sleep. Then the voice changed. It became clear, still faint, but distinct. one phrase repeated over and over in a language he did not know, yet somehow understood. "Do not disturb my sleep." The words were kind, not warning nor anger, just quiet insistence. Samir stepped back, bowing his head in silence. The air warmed again, filled with a faint breath. The coffin slowly closed, without sound. The lights dimmed, and stillness returned. He looked around, waiting, but nothing more happened. Only silence, only the reflection of his lamp swaying gently against the walls. Yet beneath that quiet, he still heard something faint, the heartbeat of the room itself. It came from the walls, the floor, the air, as if the chamber itself lived and breathed. He closed his journal and wrote a final line before turning off the light. Not all that dies wishes to be awakened. Then he leaned back against the cold wall, staring into the darkness that now felt comforting, letting his mind drift between wakefulness and sleep. When dawn first touched the rocky peaks above the valley, the morning light did not reach the chamber where Samir sat. Outside, the world had returned to its quiet rhythm. The desert wind murmured softly. Dust drifted lazily in the golden air, and the desert birds traced arcs of flight over the glowing dunes. But beneath the earth, within that silent tomb, time stood still. Samir remained in the same position, eyes half open, resting in that fragile space between sleep and waking, where dream and reality blend like two veils of mist folding into one another. He did not know how long he had sat there. Hours, perhaps the whole night. When he finally stood, his body felt light, as if part of him had remained in a realm beyond description. The metal spheres on the floor were dark now, lifeless, leaving behind only the scent of old iron and dry dust. The black coffin stood quiet and cold, motionless. Yet on its surface, something new had appeared, a faint engraving that had not been there before. Samir approached and read the delicate lines, carved as if by a gentle fingertip. He whispered the ancient Egyptian words under his breath. They meant, "Those who are silent guard more than words can ever tell." He stood motionless, the phrase echoing through his thoughts. It felt not like a message for him alone, but for anyone who dared to listen to the valley's hidden voice. Slowly, he began walking through the corridor toward the surface, his footsteps echoing softly. Each echo sounded like the slow ticking of a clock, marking the presence of something waiting in the stillness. When he emerged into the sunlight, the desert stretched before him, vast, shimmering, and gold. From afar, the valley below appeared deeper, darker, as if it had withdrawn further into itself. Samir looked back toward the tomb's entrance. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of motion, a faint shape moving among the stones, walking slowly toward a shadow, then vanishing. He blinked, but nothing remained. Only the mirage-like shimmer of hot air above the sand. Yet he knew what he had seen was not entirely illusion. He wrote quickly in his journal, his hand trembling slightly. "Something remains awake, even after I have gone." The wind brushed against his face, carrying the scent of damp stone and buried minerals. He breathed deeply, trying to recover the peace he had felt the night before. But a new feeling crept into his chest, not fear. Not unease, but the realization that he had become part of something older than time. He closed his journal and looked once more toward the valley. The Valley of Silence, he murmured. The name felt right, as if the place had spoken its own identity through him. He turned and began walking back toward his tent, the morning sun climbing higher, consuming the shadows of the night's mystery. Yet far below, in the chamber where he had sat, something stirred again, not a great movement, only the soft exhalation of breath after a very long sleep. In his research tent, Samir sat with a weary yet determined face. Before him lay stacks of notes, maps, and copied hieroglyphic inscriptions from various Egyptian archaeological sites, an intricate labyrinth of forgotten knowledge. He opened his old field journal and began comparing the symbol he had seen on the black coffin. The fine carving, shaped like a double spiral with a small central dot, was not mere ornamentation. He found it again in an old record from a dig site in Abydos, inscribed on the crumbling wall of a small temple. The mark was called the Sign of Silence, appearing only in tombs, never listed in any royal register. He read a translation by a British Orientalist from the 1920s named Caldwell. Caldwell wrote that the Sign of Silence was found in tombs, deliberately hidden, not cursed, not criminal, but sacred, protecting something that must never be spoken. He claimed its meaning was tied to the ancient Egyptian concept of Heka, the power of the spoken word to create and destroy. In their belief, silence was not absence. It was the highest form of guardianship. Samir closed the book slowly. It felt as though the symbol was not merely an artifact of the past, but a message alive beneath the sands, still watching. He lit a small oil lamp and watched the shadows flicker against the tent walls. They swayed softly, moving like the glow of candles in an ancient ritual. Outside, the wind grew stronger, brushing against the fabric until it crackled like distant whispers. Samir wrote with a trembling hand, noting every new discovery, every unexplainable sensation that defied scholarly reasoning. In his notes, he wrote, "Silence is not emptiness. It is the guardian between the living and the waiting." Hours passed unnoticed. Night fell again, bringing cold that seeped into the fibers of the tent. Samir gazed toward the valley. The moon hung high, its silver light soft across the sand. From afar, the valley appeared calm, just a barren stretch of rock and earth. But to him, every shadow, every curve of the ground seemed to breathe. He knew he would not sleep tonight. There was something he needed, to find something that might have been waiting for him for centuries. He closed his notebook gently, blew out the oil lamp, and let the darkness reclaim the space. Outside, the desert wind exhaled long and low, carrying with it a faint sound like the breath of something ancient rising from the valley below. The next morning came with pale light filtering softly through the canvas walls of Samir's tent. The air was still cold, and the desert seemed frozen, as if the entire world held its breath. He opened his eyes slowly and saw his notes scattered across the table. Among the pile of papers was a small sheet he hadn't noticed before, aged and yellow, its edges brittle. In the corner, faintly written, was a name, Caldwell. Samir stared at it for a long moment. his heartbeat steady but heavy. He unfolded it carefully, revealing handwriting in faded, ink neat yet hurried, as if written in fear of being interrupted. The note spoke of a valley on the west bank of the Nile, where ancient tomb keepers had hidden a secret coffin, one forbidden to be touched by any hand. Caldwell wrote that he once heard a sound beneath the ground near a dune known as Wadi el-Samt, the Valley of Silence. It was not wind or echo, but a slow, rhythmic breathing. He claimed that night he felt the earth beneath his feet gently pulsing, like the heartbeat of something still alive. The note ended with a chilling line: "If I disappear, I have found the gate guarded by the Silent Ones." Samir sat motionless, staring at the paper. It felt as though time itself paused, allowing his thoughts to drift between the present and a hazy past. He imagined Caldwell standing in that valley nearly a century ago, staring at the same horizon, feeling the same wind, hearing the same whispers. Could it be that Caldwell had truly found something? Or had he simply lost himself to his own obsession? The question hung in the air unanswered, like a shadow that refused to fade even under the sun. He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his journal. Then he stepped out of the tent and gazed across the valley. The morning light spread from the east, washing the sand in soft gold. The wind carried the scent of dust and ancient stone. Samir knew he had to go there today. He didn't know what he would find, but deep inside, he felt something had been waiting for him, a presence, wanting to be seen or remembered. Slowly, he packed his equipment, preparing as though he were about to cross the border between the visible world and the one that watches in silence. Samir's steps were slow as he began descending the rocky path toward the valley. The morning sun was still gentle, yet the shadows of the surrounding hills stretched long, like ancient hands reaching for something lost to time. Each step crunched softly beneath him, the sound of sand and stones breaking underfoot. The air was warming, yet the valley itself felt strangely cool, as if it held a breath not belonging to the surface. From afar, the desert seemed ordinary, just a silent expanse of emptiness. But the closer he came, the stronger the sense that this place was different. The wind carried an unusual scent, not just earth and dust, but a faint mix of metal, incense, and something disturbingly like old dried flesh. He stopped at the rim of the valley, looking down. The ground formed a large depression marked with concentric lines of stone, like the remnants of an ancient excavation too symmetrical to be natural. At its center stood a massive black stone, half buried in sand. Samir stared at it, gauging the distance, then began his slow descent. He carried little with him: a flashlight, a notebook, a small map, and a knife for scraping artifacts. When his boots finally touched the valley floor, the world changed. There was no sound of birds, no whisper of wind, no pulse of life, only silence. He could even hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady in his head. He crouched, studying the sand. Amid the golden and brown grains, he saw tiny glint shards of something like glass. He picked one up and realized it was not glass at all, but a thin fragment of quartz, scorched on one side. Lifting it to the light, he saw a dark streak inside it, like smoke trapped in crystal. He remembered Caldwell's notes, about something breathing beneath the ground. And without meaning to, his eyes drifted back to the black stone. It seemed darker than the shadow itself. As he approached, he saw it wasn't a simple rock. Fine carvings covered its surface, worn nearly smooth by time. He touched it, and the stone felt warm, though no sunlight reached it. The carvings spiraled inward into the shape of a closed eye, and at its center was a narrow slit just wide enough for a finger. Samir leaned closer, and what he saw made his breath stop. Deep inside the slit was a small, dark mark red, like dried blood centuries old. He couldn't tell if it was a symbol or a stain left by something that once flowed. He glanced around. There was no one. Nothing moved except the still air and waiting sand. He took a slow breath and scribbled a note in his journal. Day 1 at Wadi El Samt. Black stone at center of valley emits internal heat. Carving resembles a closed eye. Faint red mark inside, possibly mineral or residue. He closed the notebook carefully and looked again at the stone. Between the heat of the sun and the deep stillness, Samir began to feel that this valley was not dead, was merely sleeping. Samir decided to examine the area around the black stone before the day grew hotter. He moved slowly in a circle, marking key points with the short wooden stakes he carried. On the northern side, he found flat stones arranged like fragments of an ancient floor partly buried beneath the sand. He crouched and blew the dust away. Beneath the thin layer of sand, carvings emerged, clearer than those on the central stone. These weren't mere decorations. They depicted small human figures, but their faces were wrong. They had no eyes. Only hollow sockets and open mouths, frozen mid-scream, as if calling out to something unseen. He brushed away more sand and uncovered details that made his skin crawl. Some of the figures were carved as though they were crawling out of the ground. Their hands were rendered in exquisite detail, long, thin fingers reaching beyond the carved border, as if desperate to escape the stone itself. Samir photographed everything, jotting down quick notes in his journal. Relief depicts eyeless humans emerging from ground. Carving too fine for pre-dynastic era. As he wrote, he began to feel something strange. The ground beneath him trembled just slightly, so faint he wasn't sure if it was real or the pulse in his veins. He held his breath and waited. The tremor stopped. But then, from the direction of the black stone came a faint sound, C-L-I-C-K, click, dot dot. Click, dot dot, like pebbles shifting under pressure. He turned sharply. Nothing moved. But in the sand, he saw a delicate trail, freshly drawn, as if something had just slid beneath the surface. Samir stood, stepping back slowly, scanning the silent valley. The air felt thicker now, as though the heat was alive, watching him. He looked again at the black stone and, for the briefest instant, it seemed to pulse. Not violently, but subtly, like the slow heartbeat of something buried deep below. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The sand at its base had shifted slightly, forming a faint ripple outward, as though something beneath was stirring. In that stillness, Samir felt an odd dryness in his throat, not thirst, but a metallic taste, cold and bitter. He took 2 careful steps back, saying nothing, writing nothing. For the first time since he'd entered the valley, he understood that whatever Caldwell had discovered here was not just an artifact. And if the legends of Wadi El Samt were true, then what slept beneath this place was not dead. Night fell without wind. The sky above the Valley of Silence looked heavy and pale, as if covered by a thin, motionless mist. Samir lit a small lantern beside his tent, its amber glow falling across his tired face and casting long shadows across the sand. The usual desert crickets were gone. Even the faint whisper of shifting grains had stopped. He wrote a few last lines in his journal, his hand trembling slightly not from fear, but from the cold that seemed to seep from the ground itself. The temperature drop was typical of desert nights, yet this chill felt different. It came not from the air, but from beneath the earth, like a slow exhalation from something imprisoned far below. He sat quietly, trying to steady his breathing. Opening Caldwell's old field notebook, he reread the frantic handwriting, hoping for a clue. On one page, nearly torn at the edges, Caldwell had written, "They were not buried in the tombs, but beneath them. There's a layer unseen by any map." Next to it was a rough, sketch a curved line with a cross marked below. Samir stared at it for a long while, then lifted his eyes toward the moonlit valley. The silhouette of the black stone stood darker than its surroundings, as if it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. Then he heard something. A whisper so faint it might have been imagined drifting from the direction of that same stone. It wasn't clear speech, more like the murmur of sand shifting underwater. Samir straightened, listening. Slowly, he extinguished the lantern, letting darkness take over. For almost a full minute, there was nothing. Then, faintly, he noticed movement. The sand around the stone was trembling ever so slightly, forming concentric ripples as though stirred by something beneath. Samir moved forward cautiously, flashlight in hand. The beam fell across the stone, revealing a new crack that hadn't been there earlier that day. The fracture was hair-thin, yet from within seeped a thin white vapor, curling softly in the air, cool despite the desert warmth. He crouched and leaned closer. The vapor smelled of iron, wet stone, and something faintly like dried blood. For a brief moment, he glimpsed something golden flicker deep within the fissure, then vanish. He backed away, scanning the valley. Everything remained still. Yet the air pressed against him with a presence silent, watchful, waiting. He couldn't explain it, but he felt certain that the place wasn't asleep. That beneath the soil and the ancient stones, something was still breathing, waiting for the right night to open its eyes again. Samir returned to his tent without looking back. Before closing his journal, he wrote a final line. "The valley is not silent. It only listens." Samir awoke abruptly to the sound of footsteps outside his tent. The steps were slow but deliberate, as if someone were treading carefully across the sand. He opened his eyes, breath held still. The lantern that had gone out earlier now burned faintly, its flame trembling though there was no wind. A long shadow moved gently across the tent wall. Samir reached for his flashlight, switching it on without a sound, then turned his gaze toward the half-open flap. Beyond it lay only darkness, washed in pale moonlight. Yet the footsteps continued, circling the tent from behind. He did not rush outside. Instead, he listened. The steps paused for a moment, then resumed, more than one now. 2, maybe 3. They sounded human, yet too light, leaving no weight in the sand. Samir lifted the flap slightly and peered out. No one. Only the valley, silent and still beneath the moon. But the sand near his tent looked subtly disturbed, as though someone had stood there too long, leaving faint circular impressions. The air felt dense around him, holding its breath. Then another sound came. Not footsteps this time, but a long, deep inhalation coming from the direction of the black stone. It was heavy and cavernous, like the breath of something sleeping underground. Samir stepped out, sweeping the flashlight beam toward it. The stone stood motionless, yet the sand around it had shifted into strange patterns, interlocking circles, frozen mid-rotation. He moved closer, sinking slightly into the soft, ash-like sand. The white vapor still seeped from the stone's crack, and within it, the golden glint returned clearer now, unmistakable. It looked like a rounded object, perhaps a jewel or a piece of metal. Crouching, Samir brushed the sand aside carefully. As his fingers touched the stone's edge, a faint vibration pulsed beneath his skin, rhythmic, alive. He drew back sharply. From within the fissure came a whisper, many voices at once, layered and distant, speaking in a language he could not comprehend. He couldn't make out words, but the tone was sorrowful, weary, pleading to be remembered. And then, suddenly, the lantern inside his tent went out. He turned. In the half-open doorway stood a figure still, faceless, shaped like a man made of mist. It did not move, only watched him. After a long silence, it turned and began walking toward the black stone. Its steps made no sound, and the sand did not stir beneath it. Samir wanted to call out, but no voice came. He could only watch as the figure disappeared into the pale fog of the valley, leaving nothing behind but silence. The night air in the valley grew colder, though dry as if the dust itself had lost direction. Samir stared at the spot where the misty figure had vanished. Then, without thinking, took his lantern and followed the faint traces in the sand. The moon hung high, its light glimmering on every grain, making the ground's tiny ridges appear alive. Each step he took deepened the silence, as if the valley swallowed every sound that left his breath. There was no wind, no insects, only his heartbeat echoing in the stillness. He walked toward the black stone again, and the mist thickened, flowing like smoke from ancient incense that burned without flame. When he reached the stone, he saw the sand beneath it had been disturbed. A circular mark was visible, and in its center, something solid protruded from the surface. Samir knelt and brushed away the sand with his hands, revealing a flat slab of stone, smooth yet cold as metal. Etched across its surface were strange symbols, repetitive lines that resembled letters, though belonging to no known language. Some shapes resembled eyes, spirals, and hands grasping invisible objects. He studied them closely, but the longer he looked, the more the carvings seemed to shift, subtly rearranging themselves. He reached out to touch it, and when his fingers met the stone, a dim light seeped from the carvings like drops of moonlight sliding across the surface. The light was gentle, not blinding, but it filled his chest with an indescribable heaviness. It felt as though something beneath the earth had just opened its eyes. From behind the stone came a faint whisper, echoing like water dripping in a deep cave. The sound was not language, but Rithoma breathing pattern trying to form words. Samir's chest tightened. The air grew thick, and time seemed to pause around him. Then, within that soft light, another shadow took form in the sand. Not his own shadow, but the same figure as before, standing across from him beyond the mist. It slowly raised its hand, pointing at the ground before it, and vanished once more. Samir looked down where it had pointed and saw another shape beneath the shifting sand. A larger stone tablet, half buried, its cracked surface revealing a single prominent symbol, an eye with 3 lines trailing downward like tears. He knelt, brushing the sand away with patience, and as more of it emerged, he realized it wasn't just a stone, it was something sacred. The tablet felt heavy, yet warm to the touch, as though life pulsed beneath its surface. The carvings around the eye seemed to tell a story, perhaps of spirits or tomb guardians, but Samir could not decipher it. He only knew that beneath this stone, something was waiting to be found, something that wanted to be seen, yet never touched. When Samir tried to lift the stone tablet, something heavy resisted from beneath. He pressed harder, but the ground began to shift, as though something alive stirred within the sand. The lantern in his hand swayed, its light dancing across the softly glowing surface of the tablet. He paused, staring at his own shadow stretching across the sand, but its shape no longer resembled his. It was taller, thinner, and moved independently of his body. In the stillness of the valley, time seemed suspended. Only the sound of his heartbeat and a faint whisper rose from beneath the earth, like a long breath that had waited millennia to be drawn again. Samir stepped back, trying to understand what he saw. Beneath the tablet, something wavered like roots emerging from the soil, but shaped more like fingers. Long, gray, brittle fingers, as though belonging to a body that had long since decayed. He stared, frozen between fear and fascination. The sand trembled around the tablet, producing a soft, water-like rustle. The air grew colder, denser, as if each grain of sand carried whispers forming words beyond his comprehension. Then, suddenly, the tablet moved on its own. Slowly, without touch, as though pulled by invisible hands from within the ground. Samir watched, unable to look away, as a dark gap opened beneath it. An ancient scent rose from below, a mixture of dust, resin, and something like burnt oil. The lantern trembled in his grasp, its light flickering, but enough to reveal that the hole was deep. And the walls were carved with symbols older than any he had ever seen. The carvings were rough, primitive, as if made by the first humans to ever touch stone. Figures stood in rows with the heads of animals, their thin bodies staring skyward with immense eyes. Samir knelt at the edge, peering deeper. From below came a faint sound, like water dripping on stone, but rhythmic like a slow heartbeat pulsing from the belly of the earth. He leaned closer, and something in the darkness shifted. Not sudden, not violent, just a quiet movement, as if watching him in return. He raised the lantern, and for an instant, he saw a pair of eyes down there far within the dark, not glowing, not frightening, but alive, gazing at him calmly, as if they had known him forever. A heaviness filled Samir's chest, not fear, but realization. He began to understand that this place might not be a tomb, but something older, deeper than a resting ground. The tablet was not a marker, it was a door. And if it was a door, then something beneath was waiting to be opened. Samir lit the spare lantern hanging from his belt, for the main flame had begun to fade under the draft rising from below. The small flame trembled softly, casting shadows that moved like veils along the walls. He tied a leather rope around his waist, secured it to a large stone above the hole, and slowly lowered himself into the darkness. Each brush of rope against rock made a faint sound, like a whisper following his descent. The sand gave way to stone beneath him, and the air grew colder until his breath became a thin mist floating before his face. The sound below grew clearer, not dripping water now, but a deep, rhythmic breathing, as if the valley itself inhaled and exhaled in long, patient intervals. When his feet touched the bottom, he realized the ground was not stone, but something softer, a mix of dust and ash. He raised the lantern higher, revealing the walls around him. They were covered entirely with carvings, not letters, not images, but flowing patterns resembling branching rivers. In the center of the chamber stood something like a low altar, made of dark stone that gleamed faintly. Upon it lay strange objects he had never seen before, curved pieces of metal shaped like ribs, clay pots still sealed with wax, and a folded linen cloth that looked impossibly well preserved. He stepped closer, letting his footsteps echo gently through the chamber. Each echo sounded like another person walking beside him. He stopped before the altar and touched its surface. The stone was warm and like any other stone around. From within it came a faint vibration, like a pulse. He withdrew his hands slowly and glanced around. The walls seemed to shiver, exhaling softly. Fine dust drifted from the ceiling, swirling along invisible air currents that seeped from a narrow crevice in the wall. Then his eyes caught a difference. One section of the wall bore a thin slit, just wide enough for a man to crawl through. Around it, the carvings changed rougher, deeper, as though carved in haste by terrified hands. The shapes resembled small faces peering outward from the rock, mouths open but voiceless. Samir bent closer, listening. Only his own breath echoed back. He hesitated for a moment, then curiosity compelled him. He lit a second lantern, left one by the altar to keep the chamber lit, and carried the other as he began crawling into the slit. Inside, the walls were warm and damp. Each breath carried the metallic scent of age mixed with burnt incense. He crawled deeper, the tunnel sloping downward, taking him farther from the surface world. No sound remained, only the pounding of his heart growing heavier. Finally, the passage opened into a small room. At its center lay something like a stone bed, and on it rested a figure wrapped tightly in linen. But it was unlike any mummy he had seen. The body was too long, over 2 meters, and on its head rested a black mask, featureless and smooth, reflecting the dim light of his lantern. Samir stared for a long time. Then he saw if the mask was fogging up from within, as though someone beneath was breathing. He took half a step back, and the lantern trembled in his grasp, sending waves of light across the walls. Shadows rippled like waves, and something glinted in the corner, a small tablet nearly buried in dust. He approached, brushed it clean, and read the faint words carved into it. The writing was short, but it felt as though it spoke directly to him. Those who hear this breath will dream no more. Samir tried to crawl backward quickly, but the tunnel that had once been straight now seemed altered. The walls shifted slightly, like the skin of a living creature breathing slowly. Each movement of his hand made a soft sound against the warm stone, as if the place itself welcomed him to stay. The lantern in his hand trembled, its light dancing wildly, giving the illusion that the tunnel was slowly turning like a whirlpool. He stopped for a moment, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them again. But the opening he had crawled through was gone, replaced by solid stone, covered with flowing patterns like river veins, pulsing gently as if alive. He pressed his palms to the wall, hoping to find a crack, but all he felt was a subtle vibration, like a heartbeat deep within the earth. The breathing returned, no longer from one direction, but from all sides. From the walls, from the floor, even from the air itself. Long, slow breaths filled the chamber with a rhythm both calm and terrifying. Samir swallowed, trying to steady his hands as he reached to extinguish his lantern, hoping to listen more clearly, but his fingers trembled. The flame dimmed, and darkness swallowed him whole. In that darkness, the breathing grew louder, clearer, as though someone stood right behind him. He turned quickly, but there was nothing, only the cold air. Yet the scent of aged linen and metal grew stronger. He looked down, and in the faint afterglow of the dying lantern, he saw something moving, dust spiraling softly, forming a small circle on the ground. From that whirl, a thin line of light appeared, like a crack breaking through the stone. It extended toward the wall before him, slowly shaping into a rectangular doorway, or something like one. But it was not a door to the surface. It led somewhere deeper, darker. Samir stared at it for a long moment, uncertain whether to enter or wait. But the breathing, once behind him, was now in front of him, as if calling him forward. He reached toward the light, and his fingers turned cold, like touching water. As he pressed deeper, the wall seemed to swallow his hand. He pulled back and saw that his skin had turned slightly gray, coated in something like fine dust. There was no pain, only a strange sensation, as though his flesh had become part of the stone. Then another sound emerged, not breathing, but footsteps, soft and deliberate, coming from beyond the glowing wall. Something dragged behind those steps, like heavy cloth brushing stone. He stepped back, but the floor beneath him softened, like sand trying to pull him down. He struggled to keep balance as, from the glow, a tall shadow appeared, a dark silhouette with a long, narrow head resembling the black mask he had seen earlier. The shadow stopped at the doorway, motionless, facing him without a face. But where its head should be, there came the slow rhythm of deep breathing from lungs that seemed larger than human. Samir froze, trembling, and in the long silence that followed, he realized something. The breathing now matched his own. Each inhale he took, the figure inhaled too. Each exhale, it exhaled. It was as if the air between them was shared, a single rhythm that bound them both. Then the walls began to tremble faintly, the river-like carvings glowing softly. From afar came the faint sound of metal chains dragging. The chamber shifted color from gray to gold, then back to black. The breathing stopped, only to return again but multiplied. Not one, but hundreds, maybe thousands, from every direction. And within those breaths were whispers soft, endless, like prayers recited for eternity. Samir covered his ears, but the sound remained. It wasn't outside, it was inside his head. He tried to remember the sky, the sun, the wind above the surface, but the shadows seemed to swallow those memories whole. Only the gentle, warm darkness remained, and the endless, deep breaths surrounding him. In that moment, he no longer knew if he was still in the valley or if he had become part of the breathing walls deep beneath the earth. The sound of breathing had become a soft symphony, filling every corner of the chamber. It was as if the valley itself lived, inhaling and exhaling slowly, singing a song that never ceased. Samir stood in the darkness, and among the faint whispers, he began to recognize a rhythm. Every sigh, every pulse of air, it wasn't random. The breaths were coordinated, synchronized, guided by an unseen will. And within their pauses, faint tones appeared, resembling words not of any language he knew, but with a strange harmony like a mantra repeated over millennia. The words drifted softly, circled the air, and vanished before meaning could take form. He walked toward the sound, each careful step pressing against ground that felt almost alive. Every footfall created a ripple that spread like water. He knew he was too deep to return now, and the conscious part of his mind began to blur. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw that the once bare walls were now covered with carvings, not mere decorations, but faces. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, carved in serene expressions, as if asleep. Some young, some old, all with closed eyes, and from their stone mouths came the gentle breathing that merged into one endless sound. He approached one face that looked newer than the rest. The stone around it glistened faintly, damp, as if it still held life. When he touched it, it was warm, soft warmth, like the skin of someone who had just stopped breathing. He pulled his hand away, but the warmth lingered. From inside the carving came a faint whisper, like someone trying to speak without a voice. He leaned closer, ear to the stone, and something brushed his cheek. A breath, gentle and human, as if the sleeper had just awakened. Samir froze, but curiosity held him in place. He whispered softly, unsure to whom he was speaking. His voice trembled like a prayer. There was no answer, only the echo of his words, which slowly changed tone, as if absorbed and repeated differently. His voice came back from another wall, deeper, older, and far beneath the earth. They never left. It said so softly, it was almost not there. He stepped back, and the faces began to change. Some eyes opened slightly, not wide, just enough to watch. His chest tightened. The air grew heavy, and each time he breathed, the chamber breathed with him. The pulse of something vast thrummed beneath his feet, slow but powerful, like the heartbeat of the valley itself. Then, the floor began to crack a spiral opening, releasing golden dust like sacred ash. The crack widened, revealing a staircase of stone descending into darkness. The breathing deepened, and the faces on the walls seemed to bow, granting him passage. Samir stood at the edge, looking down, and in the faint glow reflected from the dust, he saw shadows, billow-long shapes resting in the depths. Perhaps sarcophagi, perhaps bodies, or something older than both. He knew the next step would decide everything. But curiosity had long devoured his fear. With slow breath and steady heart, he began his descent, step by step, while the breathing of 1,000 unseen souls continued an eternal lullaby for those who never truly died. The stairs grew slick beneath Samir's feet, as if something had just passed before him and left behind a trace of moisture. The air grew colder, yet every breath he took felt strangely warm within his lungs. The walls pulsed faintly, alive with a rhythm like slow blood. He descended the spiral further, and with each step, the golden dust faded into a dim bluish glow rising from below. The sound of breathing deepened, no longer human, but like the vast exhalation of the earth itself. At last, he reached the bottom. The floor was smooth and black, made of polished obsidian that reflected his shape in a distorted, shifting form. In the center stood a circular altar, surrounded by 6 tall statues without faces. Each held an object: a jar, a scroll, a dagger, a mask of black metal, and others he could not name. Samir stepped into the circle, and the air seemed to tighten around him. Upon the altar lay a disc-like surface, made of bone or something, like it gleaming softly like a pearl. And resting atop it was a translucent figure, almost invisible, formed from mist that held the outline of a human body. As he watched, the figure grew clearer. A woman, serene, eyes closed, hair flowing like smoke across the altar. He knew that face. He had seen her countless times in dreams, the one who called to him in a whisper through the fog of the valley each night. He had thought she was only a memory or madness. His breath caught. He stepped back, but the altar shivered slightly, as if aware of his presence. One of the statues behind him shifted with a soft grind of stone, and a wordless vibration filled the air, like an ancient chant with no voice. Then the woman's body began to glow faintly. Her eyes opened slowly, gracefully, and her gaze met his. Empty, yet full of knowing. She didn't speak, yet the air trembled with her voice. "You are the last breath of this valley," the voice said inside his mind. "The first to come, and the last to leave." Samir's knees weakened. He tried to speak, but no sound came. The air around him began to spin, golden dust lifting from the floor and above. Faint lights flickered in the faces carved into the walls. They were breathing again, all in unison, and he realized with terror that his breath had fallen into their rhythm. The altar brightened, and a weight gathered in his chest. He tried to step back, but his body no longer obeyed him. The woman's gaze remained fixed on him, calm, unfeeling, yet filled with something like sorrow. Then, From her unmoving lips, a single word rippled through the chamber. Exchange. Everything trembled. Light rose from the floor, wrapping around him. Samir felt his breath leaving, not choking, but flowing outward, given away. And in that same instant, the body on the altar began to breathe. The light did not blind, but it swallowed everything. In that silence, which felt like 1,000 years compressed into a single heartbeat, Samir realized his body was dissolving into something lighter than air. There was no pain, no fear, only a soft, strange sense of release, as though his skin no longer separated him from the world. His fingertips turned transparent, then his hands, then his whole form, fading gently into the pale blue glow. He watched himself vanish, yet his mind remained intact, clear enough to observe. The woman on the altar began to glow brighter, her body solidifying mist, becoming flesh, shadow becoming form. Her first breath was faint, like wind stirring the surface of a river before dawn. Above him, drops of water began to fall from the high stone dome. Each droplet struck the obsidian floor and scattered blue reflections. The statues around the altar shifted, opening empty eyes. From their hollow faces, white light flowed, slow and fluid, like the current of an underground stream. The voice returned not from the woman alone, but from the valley itself. It was deep, vibrating, and wordless. There were no syllables, yet the sound carried a meaning beyond human language. Samir tried to speak, but no sound came. He had no mouth anymore. He was only awareness, suspended in the glow, watching through sight that no longer required eyes. The woman rose from the altar, her movement graceful, as though waking from a sleep that had lasted ages. Her hair shimmered, her face pale, her eyes reflecting the sky of the breathing valley. She walked toward the western wall, her steps leaving trails of fading light. From the floor rose faint shadows, taking shape as other spirits awakening. They circled the altar aimlessly, humming softly, a resonance like bees deep inside a cavern. Samir felt the vibration in the air, a frequency meant for souls, not bodies. And through that pulse, he began to understand. The valley was not dead, nor alive, but a bridge between both. Here, the forgotten found new form. The buried learned to breathe again. The woman stopped before the engraved wall. She touched it gently. The stone quivered, hairline cracks appeared, and from within came a soft yellow glow, forming patterns of script. Samir saw, but could not read. It wasn't hieroglyphs or any human tongue, it was thought itself, inscribed in stone. The light traced the walls, then rose to the ceiling. The whole chamber beat like a heart. Then the air began to swirl above the altar. The spirit stopped and turned, waiting. A low hum spread through the stone corridors. The woman turned toward Samir, what was left of him. Her gaze was not cruel nor kind, but understanding, as if she knew that everything must trade places to continue existing. Then, from her lips, a long breath escaped, forming a thin cloud. Within that mist, Samir's own face began to appear, wavering in the air. He watched himself, yet not himself. He was no longer human. He was part of the valley now, part of the rock, the light, and the ancient breath that filled every grain of sand. As the light slowly faded, the valley began to change. Stones that had stood still for millennia started to move, like creatures that had held their breath too long and were now waking from a deep slumber. The moss-covered walls trembled softly, splitting apart to reveal hidden layers buried beneath for ages untold. There was no violent sound, only the deep, steady groan of earth shifting in its sleep. From the cracks, soft silver mist rose upward, drifting slowly into the cool air above. Samir, or the consciousness that remained of him, floated silently, witnessing the valley breathe for the first time in thousands of years. Beneath the altar, the floor fractured into a massive circle. From within emerged something that looked like a pool, though its surface had no color. It resembled a living mirror, reflecting the blue glows dancing in the air. Each time the mist touched it, ripples spread, and within those ripples appeared faint images of the past. Samir saw figures walking upon the mirrored surface, priests in white linen robes, carrying stone vessels, chanting words he could not understand. They seemed like echoes replayed through time, not alive, yet not entirely dead either. The valley unfolded like an old memory, reluctantly reopening itself. The statues that lined the walls seemed to breathe, their chests rising faintly, though carved from stone. From their hollow eyes drifted thin trails of black dust that vanished into the air. Not frightening, but filled with an uncanny calm, like a silence that knew more than it should. Then, from the center of the mirror pool, a new light emerged, golden, yet not like the sun. It pulsed slowly, softly, like the heartbeat of something ancient returning to life. Within it appeared a small triangular stone, no larger than a human hand. But Samir sensed at once it was no ordinary object. The air around it trembled with every pulse, and the valley seemed to move in rhythm with its breath. The stone felt like the heart of the place, the essence sealed away with the death of its keepers. Samir drifted closer. Though he had no body, warmth radiated through his awareness, gentle warmth, like the breath of the earth itself. The stone called to him, not with sound, but with memory. Visions spilled into his mind. The valley alive with water, boats gliding across, people bringing blue flowers as offerings. The sun sinking behind cliffs, and someone standing upon this same altar, raising the very stone now before him. Then the vision faded, and something stirred in the distance. From deep within the dark corridors came a slow, rhythmic, sound-heavy footsteps, far too massive to be human. The ground quivered. Ripples spread across the mirrored pool. The woman turned toward the sound, her face calm, but her eyes filled with knowing, as if she had waited centuries for this moment. Samir felt something indescribably, mixture of wonder and sorrow. He knew something was coming, and when it did, the valley's truth would no longer be hidden. Yet he also understood that some secrets were never meant to awaken. Perhaps, in this valley of silence, sleep was the only way to preserve the fragile balance between the seen and the unseen. The tremors grew stronger. Stones around the altar began to shift, dust raining from the shadowed ceiling. The heavy footsteps were now clear, echoing from deep below as if something was climbing from the belly of the earth. The mirror at the center rippled violently, its golden glow shifting into a deep crimson, like sunlight striking blood. From within rose a shape impossible to define, a massive shadow that was neither solid nor smoke. It took the form of a man, made of darkness and fire. Walking slowly across the mirror's surface without leaving a trace, Samir watched in silence. There was no fear, only a quiet sense of reverence deep within his fading consciousness. The figure moved slowly, each step heavy yet calm, every motion leaving a deep vibration that resonated through the valley. Up close, its form became clearer. The being had a human face, but its skin was dark and gleaming, like polished obsidian. Its eyes emitted a dim blue light, like stars hidden behind fog. Across its body ran intricate carvings resembling hieroglyphs, glowing faintly with each breath it took. The woman by the altar bowed her head, as if recognizing the entity. She said nothing, but in the stillness, the being raised its hand slowly, pointing toward the small triangular stone still pulsing at the pool's center. The stone quivered faster, releasing streams of blue light that wrapped around the room. The mist-like glow touched the walls, revealing ancient carvings hidden beneath layers of dust and time. Those carvings told a story. Samir could not read them, yet somehow he understood. It was the story of the valley's sacred place where souls were purified before crossing into the next world. The priests who guarded it did not protect treasures, but balance itself the boundary between life and death. But long ago, one man had tried to harness that power for immortality. From that day, the valley sealed itself, and all who took part were buried with their secret. The great being approached the stone. The light along its body brightened with each step, causing the mirror beneath to tremble. It stopped before the altar, turning its glowing eyes toward Samir, aware of his presence. No words were spoken, yet Samir heard a voice inside his mind, deep, calm, and clear. "You are not of them," it said, "but you came with curiosity, not greed. You will see, but you will not take." Light enveloped Samir's awareness. Thousands of images flashed before him, the valley's history replayed in silence. He saw people carving temples, praying beneath the sun, weeping under the stars. He saw floods swallowing villages, and the last priest sealing the gates of the valley with a spell before vanishing into the wind. It all felt both distant and deeply real, like memories borrowed from time itself. When the vision ended, the being lowered its hand. The glow dimmed, its form dissolving into soft ash that drifted down onto the mirror's surface. The triangular stone now glimmered faintly, its pulse steady and calm. The woman looked at Samir one last time, her gaze filled with something unspoken, part farewell, part gratitude. Then her form dissolved into silver mist, vanishing into the cool air of the silent valley. Samir floated alone, listening to the valley's final breath echo softly. He knew something had ended, though he could not name it. Perhaps the valley simply wanted to be remembered, not understood. And now he was nothing more than a witness to what had waited too long to be seen. The wind in the valley moved again, carrying the scent of damp stone and soil newly touched by time. The heavy sounds had vanished, replaced by a soft stillness, like a deep breath after a long prayer. Samir still stood by the pool, staring into the mirror surface now calm and rippleless, reflecting only his faint face blurred by thin mist. He felt light, as though part of him had been left behind in another layer of the world. In the distance, the last blue light faded, disappearing into the stone walls that seemed to seal their secret once more. The valley was drawing its blanket of night, ready to sleep again after millennia of waking. He tried to walk, but each step felt unreal. The ground beneath him was soft, flowing like sand beneath his feet. Around him, the shadows of the walls shifted as if the valley itself was breathing. From the darkness appeared faint-shaped statues, pillars, and carved human faces that seemed alive for a moment, then froze again into stone. From between them came whispers too ancient to understand, perhaps a language that had died with its priests thousands of years ago. The whispers were not frightening. They sounded like a lullaby, inviting whoever heard them to close their eyes and forget the outside world. Samir closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound seep into his thoughts. Time seemed to lose its shape day and night, blended into a single, endless calm. He thought of how this valley might have been a home for those no longer remembered, for nameless souls and prayers that were never answered. Here, everything moved slowly, yet nothing stopped. He felt a strange kind of peace, not because he was safe, but because there was nothing left to fear. In this place, all things had passed beyond fear and turned into perfect silence. When he opened his eyes again, the sky above had changed. Its blackness faded into pale gray, as if a distant dawn was struggling to pierce the mist. But the light did not come from the sun, came from the stones around the valley, glowing softly. Each stone emitted a gentle golden light, forming a circular pattern on the ground. It's like an ancient map, marking something that no longer existed. At its center, where Samir stood, the air felt lighter, and a low humming sound like the heartbeat of the earth pulsed beneath his feet. Among the light, Samir saw something footprints forming in the valley's dust, but they were not his. Another set of prints ran parallel to his own, leading toward the valley's edge. They looked fresh, as if just made. He looked around, but no one was there. Only the whispering wind, speaking words he did not understand, but somehow felt familiar. He followed the footprints slowly, each step taking him farther from the mirror pool, toward a massive stone wall now slightly open, revealing a narrow, dark corridor. Before stepping inside, Samir turned back to look at the valley. The pool was dim now, the mist rolling over it like a curtain closing after a performance. He knew once he left, the valley would seal itself again, perhaps for another 1,000 years, perhaps forever. Yet he also knew there was no other path but forward. The valley's voice still followed him, faint but lingering, like a whisper from the edge of a dream. He entered the corridor slowly. The light inside was a pale blue, coming from crystals growing along the walls. His footsteps echoed softly, each echo fading sooner, as if the sound was being swallowed by the earth. The corridor twisted, sloping downward, then upward again. He did not know how long he walked. For time there had no direction, only the sound of his breathing and the whispers that walked beside him. Finally, he saw a white glow at the end of the tunnel. It was bright but gentle, like morning light newly born. He walked faster, breaking through warm air, and when he stepped out, he found himself in the same valley, yet different. The sun hung low on the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. There was no mist, no mirror, no trace of mystery, only quiet earth and softly swaying trees. He turned back to the stone wall he had just exited, but it was sealed shut as if the passage had never existed. Samir stood still, feeling the world around him breathe in peace. He did not know whether he was in the same world or had crossed into another, unnamed one. But amid the silence, one truth remained clear. The valley still lived, and he had become a small part of its secret. The wind in the valley moved again, carrying the scent of damp stone and soil newly touched by time. The heavy sounds had vanished, replaced by a soft stillness, like a deep breath after a long prayer. Samir still stood by the pool, staring into the mirror surface now calm and rippleless, reflecting only his faint face blurred by thin mist. He felt light, as though part of him had been left behind in another layer of the world. In the distance, the last blue light faded, disappearing into the stone walls that seemed to seal their secret once more. The valley was drawing its blanket of night, ready to sleep again after millennia of waking. He tried to walk, but each step felt unreal. The ground beneath him was soft, flowing like sand beneath his feet. Around him, the shadows of the walls shifted as if the valley itself was breathing. From the darkness appeared faint shape statues, pillars, and carved human faces that seemed alive for a moment, then froze again into stone. From between them came whispers too ancient to understand, perhaps a language that had died with its priests thousands of years ago. The whispers were not frightening. They sounded like a lullaby, inviting whoever heard them to close their eyes and forget the outside world. Samir closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds seep into his thoughts. Time seemed to lose its shape. Day and night blended into a single, endless calm. He thought of how this valley might have been a home for those no longer remembered, for nameless souls and prayers that were never answered. Here, everything moved slowly, yet nothing stopped. He felt a strange kind of peace, not because he was safe, but because there was nothing left to fear. In this place, all things had passed beyond fear and turned into perfect silence. When he opened his eyes again, the sky above had changed. Its blackness faded into pale gray, as if a distant dawn was struggling to pierce the mist. But the light did not come from the sun, came from the stones around the valley, glowing softly. Each stone emitted a gentle golden light, forming a circular pattern on the ground, like an ancient map marking something that no longer existed. At its center, where Samir stood, the air felt lighter, and a low humming sound like the heartbeat of the earth pulsed beneath his feet. Among the light, Samir saw something: footprints forming in the valley's dust, but they were not his. Another set of prints ran parallel to his own, leading toward the valley's edge. They looked fresh, as if just made. He looked around, but no one was there, only the whispering wind, speaking words he did not understand but somehow felt familiar. He followed the footprints slowly, each step taking him farther from the mirror pool, toward a massive stone wall now slightly open, revealing a narrow, dark corridor. Before stepping inside, Samir turned back to look at the valley. The pool was dim now, the mist rolling over it like a curtain closing after a performance. He knew once he left, the valley would seal itself again, perhaps for another 1,000 years, perhaps forever. Yet he also knew there was no other path but forward. The valley's voice still followed him, faint but lingering, like a whisper from the edge of a dream. He entered the corridor slowly. The light inside was a pale blue, coming from crystals growing along the walls. His footsteps echoed softly, each echo fading sooner, as if the sound was being swallowed by the earth. The corridor twisted, sloping downward, then upward again. He did not know how long he walked. For time there had no direction, only the sound of his breathing and the whispers that walked beside him. Finally, he saw a white glow at the end of the tunnel. It was bright but gentle, like morning light newly born. He walked faster, breaking through warm air, and when he stepped out, he found himself in the same valley, yet different. The sun hung low on the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. There was no mist, no mirror, no trace of mystery, only quiet earth and softly swaying trees. He turned back to the stone wall he had just exited, but it was sealed shut as if the passage had never existed. Samir stood still, feeling the world around him breathe in peace. He did not know whether he was in the same world or had crossed into another, unnamed one. But amid the silence, one truth remained clear. The valley still lived, and he had become a small part of its secret. In that soft morning, as sunlight pierced the ridge far to the east, Samir stood still. He heard something strange, not a sound, but a subtle vibration in the air, like a long breath held within the earth. The ground beneath his feet trembled gently, not frightening but soothing, as if something was slowly awakening from a long sleep. He looked down and saw the grains of sand vibrating, forming faint patterns of circles and winding lines. The patterns were not random. They resembled the inscriptions he had once seen on the walls of ancient tombs, but now they appeared directly on the earth, alive and shifting. He crouched, touching the surface with his fingertips, feeling a soft warmth spreading through his skin. It was as if an ancient memory had been reignited within him. Suddenly, the image of the valley reappeared in his mind, a vision of the past he had never witnessed, yet somehow felt he had once belonged to. He saw a group of priests walking among massive stones, carrying jars of water from the Nile. In their hands, torches burned with blue flames, and from their lips came the same chant he had heard in his dreams. They stopped at the center of the valley, right above where he stood now. One of them drew a circle on the ground with a staff and lifted his hand toward the dark sky. From beneath the earth, light began to rise, glowing from below, filling the valley with golden radiance. Samir froze. He realized he was seeing what had happened thousands of years ago, not through human eyes, but through the memory of the ground itself. The priest spoke, but his words were only a low hum in Samir's ears. Around him, the shadows of others began to form faces of sadness, serenity, and prayer. They stood at the edge of the circle, waiting for something unseen. Then the earth trembled more strongly. The sound of stones shifting echoed from afar, and a great doorway opened in the valley wall. From within, a white light poured out, and a cold air swept across the place. The eldest priest entered, followed by 2 others. But before the door closed, he turned and looked directly at Samir, as though he knew someone from the future was watching. His gaze was gentle but deep, like the eyes of one who had seen beyond worlds. Then all vanished. The light faded, the ground stilled, and only the wind remained, circling softly around Samir. He stood still, his heart pounding. He understood that what he had seen was not a dream, but a memory stored by the earth itself. Every grain of sand in the valley might hold fragments of the past, waiting for someone who could listen. Perhaps the Valley of Silence was not merely a place of the dead, but something greater, a doorway into the memory of the world, where every forgotten soul was preserved as echoes that could not be seen. Samir lifted his gaze. In the distance, the sky changed color. The pale blue slowly turned golden, but the light was not from the sun. It came from the east, from beyond the mountains where the Nile began its journey. That light seemed to invite him to walk, to continue a path left unfinished for millennia. He knew the valley had not finished its story. He knew there were still layers hidden behind those silent stone walls. Slowly, he walked toward the light. With every step, he heard faint echoes beneath the ground, whispers of names unknown. Something was changing in the air, as if the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of spirits was thinning. Small birds flew across the sky, but their chirps sounded distant, as though coming from within a dream. Along the way, he found a large stone engraved with an eye staring westward. Beneath it was an inscription in ancient hieroglyphs, most of it erased by time. Yet one line remained clear. No one dies beneath the still light. Samir stared at the line for a long time. He did not fully understand it, but his heart trembled softly. Perhaps it was not a warning, but a reminder that in this valley, death was merely another form of existence, that even silence could be light. He touched the stone and continued walking, letting the valley guide him deeper, toward the secret that waited beneath the untouched earth. The sky dimmed again, as if the sun that had just risen hesitated to continue shining above the valley. The golden light that once caressed the stones slowly turned into soft gray, and the air grew cold, though not biting. In the distance, Samir saw a thin mist creeping from between the rocks, covering the path he had just taken. The mist was unlike any ordinary fog, for within it flickered faint glimmers of slow-moving light, like fire that had lost its heat. He walked on, passing his own shadow that grew and shrank upon the sand. His steps were careful now, for he felt as though the ground beneath him was alive, breathing slowly, listening to every footfall. He reached a plain unlike the rest. The ground there was hard and smooth, as if once coated with something not of this earth. Its surface reflected the dim light of the sky, and in the center stood a tall black stone pillar, solitary and unmarked by any human hand. The pillar was dark as soot, yet faint carvings shimmered upon its surface when he approached. He brushed away the dust near its base and found a large spiral pattern repeating upon itself, depicting a descent into the earth. Samir gazed at it for a long time. He felt as though he had seen the pattern before in a blurred dream, or perhaps on the walls of a tomb long swallowed by the desert. When his fingers touched the spiral center, the stone vibrated softly. Not an earthquake, not an illusion. The rhythm was steady, like the pulse of a giant heart breathing beneath the ground. From its top, a thin beam of light began to descend, tracing the carved grooves until it formed a glowing circle at the pillar's base. The air shifted, filling with the scent of damp soil and faint incense. Samir stepped back, unable to look away. The light grew brighter, then stopped. Suddenly, a sound emerged from within the stone, not words, but a deep hum that resonated through his chest, a voice that required no ears to hear. It was not human. The sound felt ancient, impossibly old, and calm. It was neither kind nor cruel. It simply existed, like the stillness of the sun. Within the hum, Samir caught fragments of something soft tones, like someone singing names long erased from memory. The names came one by one, gliding like shadows on water before vanishing into silence. He could not help but respond. Though he didn't know how, his lips parted, and he spoke words he did not understand. His voice came out gentle, blending with the tone of the stone, and in that moment the air shifted once again. From the ground around him, small circles of light rose, floating upward like fireflies. Yet they were not insects. The lights were softer, slower, and each time one drifted close to his face, he felt a subtle presence brush against him. Then, from the center of the pillar, a shape appeared, vaporous and human-like, transparent as mist. Its face was indistinct, but its movement was graceful and calm. It didn't step forward, it glided. The figure approached, gazing at Samir without eyes, only with a faint radiance where its face should be. There was no fear, only the stillness of time itself. The being raised its hand and pointed westward, toward the great stone wall at the edge of the plain. Samir turned, and faintly he saw a narrow slit forming in the rock where none had been before. The opening widened slowly, as if obeying the spirit's gesture. When Samir turned back, the figure was gone. Only the pillar remained, dimming gradually, as though it had completed its purpose. He walked toward the opening, feeling the air that flowed from within cold, yet gentle, carrying an unfamiliar but soothing scent. There was an echo inside, like water dripping from stone into a deep, unseen pool. He placed his hand upon the wall, feeling its dampness and the faint pulse beneath it. He took a deep breath, then stepped inside. The darkness there was not frightening. It felt like a long embrace after a weary journey. Behind him, the valley returned to silence. Only one sentence lingered in his mind, though he did not know where it came from. Those who sleep beneath silence shall awaken beneath a new name. The air within the passage was damp, and each of Samir's steps echoed long and deep, as though he was entering the hollow chest of the earth itself. The walls on either side felt soft and warm, not ordinary stone, but something that had held time within it for too long. He followed the narrow corridor slowly, while the dim light behind him faded until only the faintest glow from the pillar clung to the edge of his robe. Inside, the air seemed frozen, no sound, no wind, only a faint vibration in his head, a hum that neither began nor ended. After a long walk, the corridor widened into a vast circular chamber. Its ceiling was high and dark, but upon the walls shimmered strange symbols that looked like tiny stars. Each time Samir stepped closer, the symbols trembled, emitting a soft, pale golden glow before fading again. He touched one and felt its surface warm like human skin. In the center stood an altar made of fine sandstone, surrounded by a thick circle of dust that seemed untouched for millennia. He bent down and saw a small wooden chest upon the altar so old it had nearly turned to stone. It bore no carvings or markings, only faint lines like the impressions of hands that had held it for far too long. Samir approached cautiously, sensing the air around him holding its breath. When his hand touched the lid, the air grew cold, and a soft voice whispered from nowhere, a sound without form, like breath speaking from between the stones. "Are you not weary of seeking what has ceased to wait?" The voice murmured, not angry, but filled with sorrow deeper than time. Samir did not answer. He stood motionless, feeling the words vibrate through his chest. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside was no gold, no jewels, but something simpler, a bundle of worn cloth wrapped around a small round object. Perhaps a stone, perhaps an egg, perhaps something alive yet asleep. The cloth was still damp, as if recently washed, and it released a scent both sweet and bitter, like incense from forgotten altars. He lifted the object carefully, and when light from the walls touched it, faint patterns pulsed across its surface, like veins beneath translucent skin. From afar came a sound, like an ancient song, nearly inaudible, yet enough to raise the hairs on his neck. He stared at it longer, and as he did, the chamber around him began to change. The walls, once still, now shimmered gently as though made of breath. The surrounding symbols glowed in rhythm, forming spirals, and the air thickened like water. Then shadows rose from the floor, vague but real. They resembled people moving in silence, clad in robes made of mist. They did not look at Samir. They simply walked in circles around the altar, performing a ritual long forgotten. The song grew clearer, not from their mouths, but from the room itself, from very air. The valley, Samir realized, was not merely a tomb. It was a living memory, a breath that never died. One of the shadows stopped before him. It had no face, yet from its chest came a soft light that shaped itself into words, drifting like smoke. The words formed a sentence in a language unknown to him, yet he somehow understood. No one truly dies beneath a forgotten name. The glow faded, and the shadow dissolved back into the mist. Samir held the small object tighter. Warmth flowed from it into his chest, and for a moment he heard another heartbeat, not his own. It came from within the object. He raised it to his ear, and inside he heard a whisper, repeating like a prayer, though he couldn't grasp the words, only the rhythm, calm and eternal. In that silence, he understood. The valley had not been abandoned. had been waiting for someone to listen again. It waited for the unfinished story to be remembered, not by kings or stone carvers, but by someone still able to hear whispers between dust. And now, standing at the center of the chamber, Samir felt as though every grain of sand around him was watching with unseen eyes. The air below grew thicker, like mist that clung to the skin and seeped into the breath. Samir moved slowly away from the chamber, carrying the small object in his hand, which now felt heavier, as though something within it stirred. The corridor before him descended in a spiral, made of damp black stone. He didn't know where it led, but each step felt like descending into a memory that was never meant to be reopened. His footsteps became the only living sound, softly echoing through a passage without end. Along the walls, carvings appeared again, but different this time. Unlike the hieroglyphs above that told of gods and kings, these carvings seemed more personal. They showed ordinary people faces without crowns, hands holding jars, children asleep in their mothers' laps. Yet among them were shapes harder to understand, bent figures kneeling to the ground as if begging, while above them great eyes stared down from the stone ceiling. Each eye was carved with haunting precision, as though watching anyone who dared to pass. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary tomb. He began to notice side tunnels branching in every direction, some filled with small, unmarked stones. No names, no inscriptions, just smooth rocks placed carefully, as if someone had once tried to remember those who were never known. Samir stopped before one and knelt, brushing the surface gently. Strangely, it was warm, as if someone had just left it there. As he stood again, the corridor trembled softly. Air shifted, and from far ahead came a sound like the stirring of sand. He turned, but saw no one, only the stretched shadow of his own body across the damp walls. Then, faintly, a green-blue light flickered in the distance, dancing like a small flame through the fog. Samir approached slowly, for in this place there was no need to hurry. The light led him into another chamber, smaller yet older than the last. The walls were fragile, parts of them collapsed, revealing deeper layers of ancient stone. At the center stood a small statue buried in dust, depicting a seated figure whose face had eroded away. Upon its chest was a spiral carved into the stone, the same mark found on the small object Samir held. He drew closer, and suddenly the blue light vanished, leaving him in total darkness except for the faint glow from the thing in his hand. He stared at the statue, and in that long silence he felt as if the room itself breathed. Each time he inhaled, the space seemed to exhale in return. A subtle rhythm pulsed through the stone, and through his body a living heartbeat beneath the earth. He realized that this valley was not just a necropolis. It was an organism, an archive of breath that refused to fade. Then, from behind the wall, came a faint, scraping sound. The stone shifted, opening a narrow crack behind the statue. From it poured a chill draft, carrying the scent of dampness, and something else, a whisper like someone holding their breath for too long. Samir stepped forward, widening the opening with his hands. Beyond it stretched another passage, descending even deeper, lined with endless spirals carved into the rock. He knew that with each step, He was leaving behind the world he once understood. He was moving toward a core never meant to be seen. Yet something within him refused to stop. The object pulsed softly, as though signaling that the answer was near, even if he did not yet know the question. The passage grew narrower until he had to crouch to pass. His breathing echoed against the stone, forming a rhythm that felt strange, as if another breath joined his own. He paused, glancing behind to ensure he was alone. But in that heavy darkness, he caught a glimpse of another shadow following silent, keeping its distance. He did not look back again, for perhaps that shadow was not an enemy, but a guardian of a place that had waited too long to be found. Amid the stones and dust that no longer belonged to time, modern archaeologists stood in awe and confusion before something that seemed to transcend human knowledge. They had discovered an additional chamber beneath the valley, hidden under a layer of limestone so hard it took years to breach. When they finally opened the passage, the air that escaped from within felt different. It was not just the dampness of an underground chamber, but something heavier, pressing against the chest, slowing the heartbeat. The beam of their flashlights revealed walls inscribed with unfamiliar characters. They were not hieroglyphs, nor Greek, nor Demotic. The writing seemed the work of hands attempting to copy another tongue, one that never existed in the known world. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and upon it lay the object they had sought for centuries, though they did not know its name. An octagonal vessel made of smooth black stone, like obsidian but far lighter. When one of them touched its surface, a faint echo spread across the room, as if the object recognized the presence of man. Then something stranger followed. A faint scent, like ancient incense and river water. A whispering sound, like singing or perhaps only an illusion born from tired minds. Some of the researchers tried to record every detail, but their pens grew heavy. It was as if the air itself resisted their attempt to capture its secrets. One of them began to speak softly about the possibility that this was not a burial chamber, but a place of containment, something older than the civilization itself. He pointed to the double spiral symbol carved on one side of the stone. He said it represented an endless cycle of birth and death, but the others disagreed, saying such thoughts were born from fatigue and imagination. Yet the longer they stayed, the harder it became to distinguish between what was real and what was reflection. Their footsteps echoed as if from far away, though they stood close together. Their flashlights flickered, not from trembling hands, but as if the light itself wanted to die. They decided to leave for a while, to breathe the night air of the desert. But when they reached the surface, they found that time had shifted. The sun that should have been slowly setting was now gone, and the sky was filled with strange constellations, unfamiliar stars that did not belong to their maps. One of them looked at his watch, had stopped exactly when they opened the chamber. No one spoke for several minutes. Only the sound of the wind carrying grains of sand like the ashes of the past, reluctant to depart. The next day, when they returned with more equipment, the chamber was gone. The stones they had moved were back in place as if untouched. There was no sign that humans had ever dug there. They checked their notes, their coordinates, everything matched, but the space had vanished. Only the faint scent of incense remained in the air. They tried again to locate the spot, but every time they dug, the ground shifted. The compass spun. The maps failed. It was as though the valley itself was protecting its own secret. Some eventually abandoned the project, unable to bear the growing sense of disorientation in a valley that looked the same every day. But one man stayed. He wrote his final entry in a small tent at the edge of the cliff. He wrote that the valley was not merely a burial ground. He called it the still point of time, where all that had died and all that had been forgotten rested, waiting for something. The note was found years later, half burned, half buried in the sand. There was no name, only the symbol of the double spiral in the corner of the last page. That night, as the moon rose over the desert, villagers nearby said they saw a faint blue light emerging from behind the cliffs. Not large, just a small trembling glow like a lantern. But it stayed there for hours, as if someone were walking beneath the earth, carrying a torch that would never go out. Within the deepening silence, the valley began to reveal another side of itself. No longer merely a cemetery for rulers, it had become a place where time itself ceased to move. There was a narrow passage between two walls of stone, descending downward as if inviting anyone brave enough to follow. The walls were covered with hieroglyphs unrecognized in official Egyptian records. Some symbols resembled prayers, yet others felt like warnings, cryptic lines that spoke of those who must never be named. Each letter was carved by trembling hands, as if its maker had been rushed and afraid. At the end of that corridor, the air grew damp. The scent of earth mingled with the faint trace of ancient incense from an unknown source. In that place, archaeologists once found remnants of mummy wrappings, yet no body inside. It was as though someone had awakened and walked away. Since then, whenever sandstorms swept across the desert, footsteps could be heard beneath the ground, rhythmic, slow, and heavy. The villagers nearby called it the breath of the earth, but others believed it was the spirit of a guardian waiting for something or someone to return. No one had ever dared to stay long enough to find out. When the final night descended upon that valley, the moon hung directly above the cliffs, watching from afar. The wind ceased to blow, and all sounds disappeared. The massive stones surrounding the tombs trembled faintly, producing a deep murmur like someone breathing in a long sleep. There was no one there, yet the air felt thick with presence. Some said that on nights like this, the walls of the valley reflected a strange light not from the moon, but from something buried deep within the earth. A few archaeologists who camped near the site claimed to have heard faint singing from the distance, a language long dead, yet with a rhythm as soothing as a prayer. Perhaps it was only the voice of a wandering wind, or the echo of the past refusing to fade. Among all the mysteries left behind, the hardest to explain was not the hidden tombs, nor the lost treasures, but the feeling that the valley itself was dreaming. It felt like a creature asleep beneath the sand, guarding a secret it did not wish to share. And at the end of every night, when all stories had fallen silent, the valley remained still, gazing at the ancient sky with patience, as if waiting for the world to forget its name entirely. There is something calming in the way the valley remains silent, as if it knows that silence is the final form of eternity. Morning never truly arrives there. only a pale light revealing shadows among the ancient stones. Beneath the sand, hundreds of nameless souls still lie, with prayers no one remembers anymore. There are no signs of whether they were ever loved or simply forgotten by history that moved too fast. Some of them were builders, some were keepers, and the rest were merely swept away by time. The valley offers no answers, because perhaps there are none to give. It simply keeps, without intention to be found again. And there lies the quiet beauty in the space between memory and dream, where every grain of sand is a remnant of an unfinished story. If one were to stand there and close their eyes, they might feel a gentle pulse beneath the ground, like a heart still beating faintly. Perhaps it is only an illusion, or perhaps the valley itself is alive, breathing in its long sleep. Night will return, as it always does, covering all that once was, and the valley will continue to rest in perfect stillness. There is no ending, only deepening silence, and a secret that never wishes to be broken.